A Murder in a Gated Community by Laura Koerber, brought to you by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Tuesday Afternoon at Oaken Acres. Most murders, at least according to the mysteries Hazel read, were motivated by money, love, or fear. No one wrote about a murder done out of an excess of irritation. However, in Hazel's experience, irritation loomed large as a motivation. That afternoon, as she pulled weeds from her garden plot, she was fantasizing about the murder of her neighbor, Teresa. "I think it's a good idea," Teresa said, as she yanked weeds in her plot. They both had plots in the community garden of Oaken Acres, a gated community on the outskirts of Clam Bay, Washington. The garden consists of 100 raised beds, neatly organized in rows running east to west, and confined by a fence to keep the deer out. Outside the fence, a few acres of mowed yellow grass greeted the spring with short, green sprouts. A male golfer, protected from the chilly breeze by a windbreaker, was preparing for a swing. He cast a malevolent glance toward the garden before slamming his club into the ball. Hazel and Teresa watched the tiny white spot arc through the gray sky of March. Briefly, they shared unpleasant thoughts about the golfer. Then the ball disappeared into an ancient Gary oak tree, the last remnant of the oak prairie that had been sacrificed to the developer who built Oaken Acres. Like the golfer, the tree was a source of community tension. Together, Hazel and Teresa contemplated the shade that the tree threw on the garden. Hazel's plot was in the sun all day, but Teresa was planning to change that. Dismissing the golfer from her mind, Hazel returned to the topic at hand. "I think it's a terrible idea." She sat back on her heels and scanned the garden area. In the thin, weak sun of early spring, most of the beds were either raggedy with weeds or covered with black plastic. A few other ladies, the gardeners were nearly all female, were bent over their beds and industriously digging the weeds, but most of the plots lay untouched. The rows of rectangles looked to Hazel like a cemetery, but she had a unique perspective. The perspective was the basis for her determined opposition to Teresa's efforts to reassign plots. Hazel stated firmly, "I've spent 10 years developing my plot, and no one else has a right to it." "But Hazel, that's where you're mistaken." Teresa had an annoying way of sounding reasonable no matter what she was actually saying, perhaps a side effect of having been a school administrator for several decades. "We don't own our garden plots. Our governing documents say—" "For crying out loud, I know what they say," Hazel snapped. She was a retired PE teacher and had learned to bark orders and be obeyed. Though in her 70s, she still looked like she was about to blow a whistle and call a foul. "I founded this community garden. I know what the rules are." She stabbed her trowel down into the thick, dark chocolate of her well-fertilized soil. "It's natural, I supposed," Teresa proceeded sweetly, "that the oldest members acquired the sunniest spots way back when the garden was founded." That was a dig at Hazel's age. Teresa was recently retired, and her hair was still its naturally dark brown. Her blandly ironic blue eyes needed no glasses, and her softly rounded face was nearly wrinkle-free. Hazel suspected that quite a bit of quiet sneering went on behind Teresa's steady gaze. However, time moves on, and we have dues-paying members who have never had the opportunity for a sunny spot. Teresa set her own trowel down and swiveled on her knees to face Hazel. "It's a question of fairness. Our governing documents don't allow owners to treat sections of common area like private property." Hazel stood up. She was lithe for her age, but the sudden rise to her feet made her dizzy. Hiding the dizziness in a brief flurry of jagged movements, she knocked the dirt off her trowel, dropped it into a pail, and fished her sunglasses out of her pocket. Once steady on her feet, she looked downward at Teresa. A quick bash over the head with a shovel ought to do it, she thought as she studied Teresa's calm smile. However, no matter how satisfying it would be to whack Teresa with a shovel, it was not the right time. Not in the afternoon with other people around. Besides, she didn't have room in her garden plot for another body. "I'm done for today," she announced. She wasn't done with her weeding. She'd hardly begun, but she was fed up with Teresa. It had been a mistake to come down to the garden in the afternoon. Her normal routine was to be there in the morning so she could garden in peace and quiet. However, she'd slept in that morning after being kept up most of the night by her neighbor's barking dog. It was one thing after the other all the time at Oaken Acres. Outsiders thought the community was a quiet, peaceful haven for well-off retirees, but no, people. The fact is, Hazel thought, mystery writers didn't know much about real murders. Very few people murdered for love or money or fear. People murdered because someone else was really pissing them off. That poor dog, Jane thought. I hate Andrea. Jane was crouching just off her property and into the common area, peering with binoculars at her neighbor's Andrea's garage. The two houses were separated by an undeveloped lot and a stand of Douglas fir. Stately and mature, the trees had shaded out most of the understory shrubs, giving Jane an unimpeded view of the back of her neighbor's house and the glass doors that opened to the backyard patio. A garage was attached to the west side of the house. Inside the house, a dog was emitting shrill yips at intervals of 30 seconds. Jane had timed the yips. She had counted the number of yips per hour. Her thoughts had turned to crime. Her neighbor, an airline stewardess named Andrea, had a schedule of being home all day and night for several days in a row, followed by several days of being gone. The gone days were the problem. When absent, she left her dog in the garage, and the dog, lonely and probably scared, barked out of its stress incessantly around the clock. On and on. Each bark was a stab in Jane's heart. She could picture the dog sobbing out its desperation, and the sound made her frantic. She knew the dog was not suffering in the physical sense. Andrea obviously left enough food and water to keep the dog alive. Possibly she left a dog bed too, and the dog's toys. Nevertheless, the dog was miserable in her absence and cried out its misery, making Jane miserable too. With her small body curled up in her secret hidey hole behind the tree, Jane studied the stewardess's house. So far, Jane had identified only one way in, through the patio doors, which would most likely be locked. Then she would have to make her way through the house and find a door to the garage. Jane imagined herself groping her way, bumping into furniture that lurked in the dark, maybe knocking over knickknacks. She'd have to wear gloves for the fingerprints and hope there was no alarm. Maybe if she moved fast, took a flashlight and made a military operation out of it, tap the glass, tape the glass. She had seen that done on TV. Knock the glass with the flashlight, reach in, grab the handle and open the door, then scan the room with the flashlight. The door to the garage would be to the left. How far? There were 2 windows between the patio and the garage, so she'd probably have to go through a kitchen, then open the door and grab the dog. That was another problem. The dog was a yappy little foo-foo dog, a purebred bundle of neurosis. Cute, but demented. Jane had gotten a good look at it down at the mailroom one afternoon. Andrea had stood clutching the damn dog to her chest while it struggled and whined and yipped. Jane had kept well away until the stewardess finally got her mail and left. The dog was insane. Trying to rescue a miserable, scared dog that had a rotten personality wasn't going to be easy, and she'd have to be fast. Jane set the binoculars down inside. Far up in a tree, a squirrel chattered. Jane blinked up at a glimpse of the gray-marked sky through the crisscross of branches. Use a leash like a lasso? Would that work? Maybe. Well, it was all hypothetical because she didn't have anywhere to take the dog even if she did steal it. She couldn't just keep it in her house. Andrea would notice when she let the dog out to pee. Jane sighed again and shoved her thick gray bangs back from her face. Truth was, she was going a bit crazy from loneliness. Yes, her heart broke for the dog, but she knew that part of her obsession came from long days with nothing in particular to do. Since Abby's absence, the fun had gone out of Jane's life. Every morning she woke up to an empty bed, ate breakfast in silence, unless Andrea's dog was barking, and then faced a long, empty day of life all alone. For example, what was she going to do with the rest of that very day? With another loud sigh, Jane decided that she could continue to gather intelligence on Andrea's property by checking out the front. Jane got up and brushed the dirt and needles off of her jeans. A stroll by would be a good idea. Just walk through the little strip of the woods down to Fir Lane, take a right, and drift slowly past the front of Andrea's house. She needed to know the lay of the land. Besides, anything was better than going back to an empty house. Leslie's hand tightened on the leash of her bull mastiff Barney. She was out on their daily walk, a routine Leslie enjoyed when it wasn't raining. She liked the enormous oak trees along Fir Lane, and she enjoyed gawking at her neighbors' houses and gardens. Oaken Acres was her idea of beautiful, clean, quiet, with lots of greenery and well-kept homes. She imagined as she walked past that each house was occupied by a man and a woman who were still, after decades of marriage, friends with each other. That's what her home had been like before Frank's heart attack. Now she walked alone. Since there was no sidewalk, she and Barney were moseying down the street. Everyone walked on the street. Cars moved slowly, barely tolerated. Occasionally, children, someone's grandkids, disturbed the quiet with chatter as they whizzed by on bikes. But the streets were for pedestrians, and many of the Oaken Acres retired people kept themselves healthy with daily walks. Leslie hadn't been a walker before her husband's death. Frank and Barney had completed a 3-mile loop around the community every day, even in the rain. And fat lot of good it did Frank, she thought with bitterness. Dead and only 67, a rude snort interrupted her musings. A woman was giving her a hate stare from 30 feet away. Leslie knew her name was Hazel. People talked about Hazel in whispers. She was marching down the street as if leading a parade, except that recently Hazel had developed a sideways slant that no soldier would have tolerated. Now, every third or fourth step was a lurch to the right to get her feet back under her hips. Stomp, 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 and lurch. Stomp, stomp, and lurch. Leslie's hand tightened on Barney's leash. Barney yawned a mighty eruption of a hot dog breath and saliva. He wasn't bothered by Hazel. He wasn't bothered by anything. "Thank you for making me brave," Leslie whispered. "Let's get moving." Chin up, with a pretense of boldness, Leslie strode out along the roadside toward Hazel. She'd only gotten a few steps before she was jerked to a halt by Barney's leash and had to flail her arms to keep her balance. Embarrassed by her clumsiness, Leslie hissed a whisper at her dog. "Barney, come on!" He had found something disgusting in the grass and was mashing his face into it. "No, Barney!" Leslie hauled on the leash with her whole body, but her efforts had no effect. Ponderously, Barney sank down on his side and wallowed, feet paddling the air. Leslie felt like a complete fool holding the leash while Barney ignored her, but she knew that if she let go, Hazel would certainly remind her of the dogs on leash rule. Hazel was always reminding everyone of the rules, and she hated dogs. Desperately, Leslie hissed, "Barney, please be a good boy and get up." To her surprise, Barney climbed slowly to his feet. He shivered his big beige body from head to tail, throwing off bits of horrible gunk that Leslie suspected was dead squirrel. Then he smiled his goofy, sweet smile, and her heart melted. "Oh, Barney, you bozo, I love you so much." "I saw Pooh out here the other day," Hazel barked from across the street. It wasn't mine," Leslie stammered. "I didn't suppose it was yours," Hazel answered while she continued to stomp and lurch along the road. "There was more poop than what you could produce, a big pile, from a big dog." "It wasn't me. I mean mine. It wasn't Barney." "Just disgusting to leave the poop for other people to step on," Hazel said, and didn't even slow down as she issued her complaints. "Stomp, stomp, stomp, lurch. That dog is too big for you," she added as a parting shot. "No, he isn't." Leslie was on the verge of tears. "He's perfect for me." She bit back a sob and gave her eyes a quick wipe. "Barney, you're my best friend."